So welcome to another episode of Coming to Your Senses, where we talk about navigating the labyrinth of the mind and emerging victorious. And joining me today is the renowned author, speaker, broadcaster, and transformational coach, Michael Neill. And I genuinely, as I was putting this introduction together, I was trying to work out how many courses I've been on with you, and I actually don't know. So I couldn't say how many courses, but there's been many. And I thought, whilst I do talk about you to many people, I thought one of the best ways of sharing you with the world was having a live conversation with you, because I never know where it's going to go, because you're such a great teacher and raconteur. I just wanted to share you with everybody. And so I'm really grateful for you taking the time to be with me today and sharing you with the audience.
Excellent. So which of us is Ariadne? Which of us is leaving the thread to navigate through the labyrinth?
Well, let's just see who decides, actually, who drops it down. And
what if one of us is the Minotaur? Oh, that would be
Trust you off the bat to just take it into some kind of mythical story. I love it. I love it. And when I was putting this together, because this is called Coming to Your Senses, my first question is about, can you share a time in your life when you came to your senses? And I was thinking about, I wonder where Michael's going to take this, because I just sat and I jotted down the number of things that I know. And obviously I'm not living in your life and with you personally. And there's been some significant turning points in your life at numerous times. But what for you would you say has been a coming to your senses moment, and what and where did that really lead you to?
What comes to mind is surprising me. And it's a story you probably have heard me tell, but I had an employee for a while who drove me nuts. Like they just were continually making mistakes, and they worked in an area where it wasn't my specialty, but even I could tell that what they were doing didn't make sense. And this went on for about 7 months. And I would complain about it to anyone who I felt comfortable complaining about it to. And then I was in a meeting with them, and I looked at them, and I had this very quiet knowing. And I just had a thought, oh, you're not very bright. And it wasn't judgy. It wasn't angry. It didn't have any, in fact, all the judgment and anger had been up until that point. And it was like everything just popped into full, it was like hitting the side of a TV set in the old days. And, suddenly it comes back. And I totally, all of the animosity I'd been feeling just went. And I mean, the comic bit of the story is, and then I fired them, and they were relieved because they were in so far over their head. And it was one of these odd, beautiful moments of coming back to my senses, where I just went, wow, I have been arguing with myself about this for 7 months when I knew on day one. And then I got over it. And it was so easy. It was easy in me. It was easy for me. I became a better person by acknowledging it. It was almost surreal in how something that seemed like one of the biggest frustrations in my world cleared itself up in a heartbeat. And I was filled with just warmth and appreciation for them as a human, instead of all the just horrible thoughts and feelings I had about them right up until.
What do you think? Because I, even though other people may not have the employee story that you're sharing, I'm pretty sure that anyone listening to this is going to relate to what you've said. There's two things that strike me. Is one, that I knew this on day one, and well, three actually, and then all of the noise that went in between it. But then that kind of that point of clarity. And what I'm curious about is what do you, from your perception, what do you think it is that stops us from listening to that knowing on day one?
I think we're very compelling storytellers. I find it fascinating how often I'll watch somebody, and that somebody might be me, by the way, but I'll watch somebody talking themselves in or out of something that they already know. And it's, they don't like I didn't like the idea that I would think that of somebody. So I wouldn't let myself think that of somebody, even though it wasn't a judgy thought. It was just a noticing. I actually can think of numerous times where that desire. Okay, here's one. My first book was called "You Can Have What You Want," and we were pitching it actually under its original title of Soul Path in the UK to various publishing companies. This was back in the early 2000s, and went into one publishing company, and it happened to be all the executives were women, and we had this meeting, and one of the points I made in the book was that people know, and that the problem isn't that we don't know. The problem is that we don't like what we know, and so we convince ourselves or do our best to convince ourselves otherwise. And they asked me for an example of that, and I shared an example that was very common in my world as a coach, where people who had gone through either breakups in relationship like divorces or breakup in business relationships invariably would tell me, I knew something was up before we even started. And the CEO of the company who was in the meeting burst into tears. And I'm like, oh, dear, this pitch isn't going well. And then she just started saying that she was engaged to be married, and she was going to be married in like 6 weeks, and she knew it was wrong, but she just was trying to convince herself that it was okay because her family spent so much money on the wedding, and she was finally had met, and all these great stories. And now I don't know what happened, to be absolutely honest. I don't know what she did. I didn't have advice for her. I would never presume to have that kind of advice. But it was just an example of how everywhere you go, that dynamic is going on. Mm-hmm. We try to convince ourselves that what we think should be true is true, when actually there's something in us that just knows.
It reminds me of, I don't know whether you've watched Ted Lasso, but I'm a massive Ted Lasso fan. And Dr. Sharon, when Ted finally goes in to see her and says something about not being comfortable with the truth, and she said, look, Ted, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And I think, that line has been coming to me so much in the last few months. And when you said that, then it's like, yeah, we get compelled by these stories of what we think should be or how we would like things to be, rather than being honest with what is, which can be great, but it can also be really freaking uncomfortable. And I think we argue with that so much.
One of my creating the impossible challenges. So, but every year we do a program called Creating the Impossible. And I usually take on one of the projects for myself. And a couple of years ago, I thought, I'm going to give a lecture in Spanish. And I, at the time, literally knew sí meant yes and no meant no. That was my Spanish. I probably knew buenos dias as well. And so learning to kind of to think about what I think about and talk about what I talk about in a different language, because I was determined to not just write it in English and translate it. I wanted to actually think it in Spanish. Mm. And one of the bits that came out different in Spanish to how it came out in English is that one of the fundamental tenets of my teaching, it came from this guy, this Scottish mystic, Sid Banks, and he said, what is, what isn't. And somehow that came out in Spanish. Lo que es, lo que no es, no es. And I realized, oh God, that's fundamental to understanding life. And we just spend an incredible amount of time on what isn't. And we don't really spend all that much time with what is. And what is, minus the story about what it should be and what it shouldn't be, what is, we're actually really well equipped for. We're made for what is. We're not made for what isn't. And so consequently,
what strikes me is how convincing the what isn't it is. And yeah, I absolutely agree with you that in my own personal experience, no matter what has come my way, even if it had been put as a script in front of me beforehand, I'd have gone, oh God, no way. There's no way I'll be able to deal with that. But yet when it happens, the resources appear, people appear, whatever it may be. And I find it really fascinating that I completely agree with what you said, that what is, we actually have the resources, or the way shows up for us to deal with it. And yet the stories, we don't. And yet they seem far more attractive or compelling or seductive, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I like all those words. Though they lose their appeal, the more, what I've noticed for me, I'll say it that way, the more time I have spent with what is, and what is just is right now. It's not what was 5 minutes ago. It's not what I think will be in the next day, week, month, year. It's this. This conversation is what is. The more time I spend with what is, the more I've gone off the stories. Because even it's like how some drinks have these, especially sugar-free drinks, have this kind of icky aftertaste.
Yeah.
It's like that. It tastes sweet. The story's sweet, but it has this icky aftertaste. And I don't like that taste anymore. And so as I've lost my taste for the stories, I spend less time telling them and less time listening to them, and more time with what is. And it turns out living with what is feels really good. It's really nice. It's kind of delightful to be with people in real time and to be with life in real time. We just don't notice it because we spend so much time in the story.
And there's twice that immediately spring to mind where I've seen you in conversation with people, and both of them have been so resistant to what is, and so trying to convince you of their story, and yet they're asking you to help them see their life in a different way. And I always find it fascinating, and I've come away from conversations where people are going, oh, well, the coaching can't work then if it can't be transformed in that conversation. It's like, no, that's not what was going on. That's certainly not what I saw anyway, which was the person just didn't want to put the storybook down. That to me is as simple and as difficult as I think it can be, is that their story, whatever the story is. I remember hearing a good conversation on one of the many courses, and I wrote down in my notes, why is this guy fighting for his limitations so much, even though he's given evidence to the contrary? And you flagged up the evidence that he'd just shared. And yet he was like, yeah, but. And I wrote it down, and it was a pivotal moment for me to go, okay, if I'm seeing this so clearly out there, what's going on? Where do I do that?
What are the odds that I'm the exception?
Yeah.
Pretty low, I think. Yeah.
I one of the things that because I've been around your work more intensely, I would say, over the last 3-4 years, even though I've known of your work for a long period of time. One of the things that seems to me is that you, and this may not be how you would phrase it, but you seem to have fallen in love with people more and more the more time I spend with you. It's like no matter who it is or how they show up or how stuck with their story they might be, there just seems to be an immense amount of love that you're sharing toward them. And I think it's hard to do this kind of work without you experiencing, and I say you as in a collective, not just you, transforming their own lives as well. So has there been something that sort of you've noticed that difference as well? Is that how you would phrase it?
No. But I know what you mean.
Love that. No, you're wrong.
Look, you asked. I thought I can make up a story, Jules. Would that be better?
No,
It will
thanks.
taste good, but it will have something saccharine aftertaste.
Yeah, no, we don't want that.
So the way I experience it is and it isn't chicken and egg, whether I saw it in me first, I saw it in others first. I don't know. There wasn't a moment. But my first big, what I would call a spiritual epiphany was I was listening to Sid Banks, and I heard him say, every human being is sitting in the middle of mental health. They just don't know it. And I was a suicidally depressed teen. I dealt with depression and anxiety for most of my first 40 years. And I had actually recently written a book at that point it was supposed to be called Feel Better Now. It wound up being published as Feel Happy Now, about how to deal with your kind of emotional brokenness and still have a good life. Because that's what I felt I could talk about, honestly. And I heard that line, we're sitting in the middle of mental health, we just don't know it. And I came to my senses. It was like, oh, that's just true. I wasn't born needing therapy. Like, that was not how I came out of the womb.
Mm.
That was something I learned and habituated. And underneath it, I was still me. I was still that pure energy that it hadn't yet formed a personality, but was already there at a soul level, you could say. And it changed everything. But as far as it went was, okay, I think people aren't as broken as they think they are. At some point in the last couple of years, I started saying, oh, it's not just that we're not broken. We're freaking amazing. Like, we are so well made. We are so well designed. We work so well. The human system is designed to continually find its way back to itself. You know, whether you want to call it back to our senses, back to ourselves, where suddenly, oh, where have I been? There's a wonderful quote by Dr. Robert Holden, who says, if it feels like there's something missing in your life, it's probably you. And when we come back to ourselves, it's like everything's suddenly like, oh, this all makes sense again. Even if the circumstances still aren't great. And so as I started to delight in it, to be honest, in me and in other people, and go, God, this is really cool. And not in it, it's weird because it sounds arrogant or self-conscious. And it was actually the opposite. It was very matter of fact. It was like, oh, that's cool. Oh, wow. Even terrible things. Like, I started to see how my own depression was the system going, you're way too anxious. Let's shut it down and give your body a chance to rest. But of course, I thought, and everyone told me, that no, that's a big problem. No, that was the solution. But of course, it became a problem, and then it became a vicious cycle. And the more I saw that everything that we do makes perfect sense given the thinking we have that looks real to us, then suddenly I didn't look at people as needing to change. And I knew that if they wanted to change, I could help them. And so it's very different being with somebody as they are, thinking they should be different, or being with somebody as they are, and if they want to be different, you can help. And it's a completely different relationship that forms.
I think that's so profound from my perspective. Having spent time, I genuinely don't know how long I've done personal development and spiritual development. It's got to be over 25 years, I think now. Obviously, I started very young. That was meant to be a bigger laugh there, Michael. But I think one of the things that sort of never fails to amaze me, really, is that the more that I am comfortable with who and how I am, even if that looks messy in that moment, actually the dynamics of the relationships with the people around me so significantly change. And especially with family members who I've maybe not really been at the depth of kind of connection that I would have liked to have been. I'm not trying to accept them for who they are. It's because I'm not arguing with who they are anymore, or how they are, or how they're showing up. And I think that is such a big difference, and it never fails to amaze me again in client conversations how in the time that we spend together they will suddenly shift, and you can see like this, I refer to it as having non-plastic surgery, but they will look so different in that moment, and yet the circumstances haven't changed, and it takes them quite some time to go, oh yeah, I feel amazing, and yet all of that shit's still going on. How's that happen? What's going on there? What for you? How do you? I know that obviously you've got a specific way that you teach. Although again, I see that unfolding, it's one of the reasons I love your work so much, and do genuinely love you as well, because you're not afraid to evolve. You're not afraid to show your development. You're not afraid to have a teaching and go, yeah, that was great, and I'm going to put that down now. That's not what I want to be doing anymore. Nothing wrong with it. Just I'm moving on to this bit. And I think that that's so I love that. I just love being able to witness that. What do you think it is that is pointing for you in those different directions? That I often think of little threads that I'm like, oh, I need to pull on that. There's something in there, but I don't know what it is. What is it for you that sort of you notice those pointers and that direction and that guidance? Do you have a word that you use for it, or a practice or anything like that?
Well, let me back up a bit. So I don't want to lose I do want to respond directly to the question, but I don't want to lose. There was as you were talking earlier, something was occurring to me about acceptance. That it would be easy to hear what you and I were saying as, oh, I need to accept myself. But what we usually mean by that is I need to accept myself as the worthless piece of crap that I am. I need to accept myself as God's mistake. I need to accept myself as whatever I think is wrong with me.
I have a lot.
I need to accept the world in all its brokenness. And it's a double-edged sword, that kind of acceptance, because on the one hand, at least you stop fighting yourself. So that feels better. There's a feeling of relief in that. But on the other hand, you've accepted a story, not something that's true. You've gone, well, this story is true. I just have to accept this story. No, it's a story. True acceptance is of what is, regardless of the story. And that's a very different thing. So to your point, your question, what guides me is truth with a capital T. And I didn't even believe in that growing up. Like, I grew up in a very scientific family. Mother PhD in organic chemistry, father mechanical engineer. Just that bit of the mind was the important bit. And so the idea of absolute truth seemed like something, oh, that's cute. And I even taught for 18 years NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, the study of the structure of subjective experience, how we each see the world differently. But what I didn't see, and this was another come to my senses, holy cow.
You can swear.
Oh, I
absolutely.
Like holy fucking mother of God, HFMOT. But I was good with holy cow. You see, I
needed to give you the permission.
But what really struck me was that, oh my God, subjectivity is objectively real. The fact that we all live in separate realities created of our own minds, that's just true with a capital T. And once I saw there was such a thing as that was it, I want to know that. What is, not what story can I tell about what is, not what story do I have about what should be or what shouldn't be. And so consequently, while I've been told before, and I'm appreciative of the fact that people like that I am willing to drop one teaching and go to another, it to me, it's just like, well, why, how could I, in good conscience, keep saying something, no matter how popular it was, that I can now see isn't true? So that's why all my teaching about how to cope better with your brokenness, I couldn't keep teaching that when I realized that nobody was broken. That would be weird. So from my side, it's just been common sense. Like I set out, and it's really funny because I actually have had a mission. Like I look back on that sometimes and go, oh, that's funny, because I kind of don't teach how to be on a mission. But like I realized very early on, I wanted to uncover the secrets of happiness, success, and well-being. I wanted to live them in my life. And I wanted to share the best of what I saw with others. And so there's no way to do that and keep teaching something when there's something that's more true, that's more, that's closer, at least, to capital T.
I really get that, because I've done similar myself, only I wasn't as obviously as prominent as yourself with those teachings. And I still think that there are many people who are trying to squeeze into that T-shirt that just doesn't fit anymore, and still saying, no, it's fine. And I love it's not that it's wrong, it's just that doesn't sit anymore, and that therefore needs a shift and a change.
I mean, if leeches were good enough for my father and good enough for my grandfather, damn it, they're good enough for me.
So what there is something specific that I do want to ask you about, because however long ago it was, you did a video and it really struck me, which was around senses, and it was around the seventh sense. And obviously, most people will know about the five senses, and many people will have heard about the sixth sense. I'm not just talking about the movie. But you talked about the seventh sense and referencing common sense. And I wondered whether you could speak a little bit to that, if that's still relevant to you, or what you now see about it different to how you did before.
Yeah, and I don't know what to call it, right? The seventh sense was not like, haha, I have discovered a seventh sense. I don't know what else to call it. There's something in us that recognizes truth, that can see the obvious, that knows the emperor is wearing no clothes, that sees. You remember the movie War Games? The old 80s movie, Matthew Broderick, Ali Sheedy, and basically this computer that was built to simulate World War scenarios back when the United States and Russia were very much aiming missiles at each other. They had to find a way. The computer went rogue and basically started playing the game for real and was going to launch the missiles.
Right.
And they had to find a way to convince the computer that not to. And this kid comes up with the idea, let's teach it to play tic-tac-toe. Because tic-tac-toe is a game that ultimately no one can win if you get any good at it. And the computer plays like in 12 seconds a million games of tic-tac-toe and realizes that the only sensible move is to not play the game. And then it extrapolates from that. Well, then there makes no sense to blow each other up. Nobody wins. And this thing that I would call the seventh sense is that. You could call it seeing the elusive obvious. I'm a big believer in obviousness. That if you want to hide something, hide it in plain sight. Because actually, we go with what seems obvious to us, even if it later turns out to be untrue. And so this thing that can see the elusive obvious, which is what's right in front of our faces, but we don't see because our stories are so compelling, or we don't see because it's always been there, so we don't notice it anymore. I think of it sometimes as common sense. I think of it as sometimes as a spiritual sense, in the sense that it can sense this other dimension of life that's before the form, the energy of all things. David Bohm would talk about it as wholeness and its implicate order. And that capacity in us is I think, one of our greatest and least developed gifts.
I 100% concur. And it's interesting because my mum wouldn't talk about spiritual stuff. She doesn't really understand what I do for a living. I've just spent 4 days with her. And yet there's been numerous times where over the weekend, we were talking about different memories as they pop up. And every time it was like, I knew something was off there. It goes back to what you were saying earlier. And it's like, just pull on that, Mum. Just look at that a little bit more, because that's what I'm talking about so frequently. How do you invite people, or how's probably not the right word, actually. What are the invitations that you can offer for how you have connected with that more, or seen that more, that you can share with a wider audience, other than obviously reading your great books?
Well, obviously. No, I actually, to be honest, it's as simple as falling in love with it. And I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying, if you do, you will develop it. Like, falling in love is one of the great unsung life strategies. You want to get good at something, fall in love with it. And you'll get good at it because there's this great documentary I watched last week called Hatching Eagles. And it's about the Chinese Olympic Committee sent over 30 kids, like, young teenagers, to Finland a couple of years before the Beijing Games in 2022. and said, hey, can you turn these guys into Olympic level ski jumpers, even though normally it's a minimum 10 years training to get to that level. And we've got less than 3, and these guys aren't athletes, and most of them had never been on skis before. And they did, and 5 of them 5 of those 30 continue to compete to this day. But one of the things that was so interesting about the program is they said, we have to find and share the joy in all of this in order for us to do in 3 years what should take 10. Because they knew if the kids found the joy in it, they would do way more of it than you're supposed to if you're training sensibly. And it would be about stopping them from doing too much, not trying to get them to do more. And so they taught the whole program in joy. They taught the whole program. Now, that's actually incredibly common sense. But we don't do that. Like, who does that? Like, that's it. So when I fell in love with this 7th sense, with this capacity for clarity, then that's what I look for all the time. It's like going to a party and you look for the people that you know and want to hang out with. And it's like, I want to hang out with my 7th sense. It's awesome. Right? I want to hang out with what is. It's really cool and never dull. And so it's kind of, again, it's common sense leading you to more common sense. But it's really uncommon, which makes it ironically named.
Common sense isn't common practice, which is so sad, but very true. And yet those that I see engage with it in the way that you're talking about it. And it's that joy, and it's that joy of the magic things that show up. It doesn't even have to be big things, but it's the magic of those connections or conversations. Or as you were talking, I was reminded a few weeks ago, I was out walking the dog and it was uncommonly hot, even though it is summer. Britain, you've lived here many times. And I apologized to the dog. He'd been running around, and I said, I'm really sorry, dude. I've forgotten to bring water. I didn't expect it was this hot. And this is no word of a lie. And I walked 10 feet up the road, and there was a bottle of water just sat on the side, and just poured it out. And I openly said, this is just magical how these things happen. And that's not uncommon for that to happen for me. And I don't think that means because I'm a special person in any way, shape or form. I think it's there for everyone. It's that we're so busy looking to the right that we're not even seeing what's in the center or the left or what's behind or above or below. And there's so much more. And it's such a deep practice that I certainly have. And I love what you're saying there about falling in love, falling in love with that joy and actively looking for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I talk about that coincidence thing. Right, that I think it's in Creating the Impossible. I talk about how it's 100% reliable, but it's 98% unpredictable, which is why people don't look for it, because they can't predict where it will show up. So it's like, well, there's no point. But actually, if you know it will, then you'll be available to it when it does. Like if I know that what I need is going to come to me in real time, I'm going to hang out in real time. If I know that the bus stops at the bus stop, I'm going to hang out at the bus stop if I want to get a bus. Just common sense again.
And yet so much of the time we've put these blockers up, hooked by these stories or whatever it is, rather than opening ourselves up to all of those possibilities. I genuinely would love to keep conversation going with you for at least about another 4 or 5 hours. But I'm making a slight guess that you've got other things to be getting on with.
I might have something in that time. Yeah.
Just a little bit. Is there anything else that you would like to share that I haven't asked about around? There's a word that you keep using that I love, which is that clarity. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about that, or anything else? Obviously, we're putting all your details in show notes and everything for people to be able to reach out and stalk you as I do.
I think the biggest thing that I have come to see about our genius design as humans is that our feelings are giving us continual feedback on direction and kind of on track, off track, warmer, colder, and not in the way that we think. So it's not, oh, I feel bad when I think about this, so I shouldn't do it. No, I feel bad when I think about this, so maybe the way I'm thinking about it isn't helpful. I feel good when I think about this, so I should do it. No, but you feel good when you think about it this way, so there's something in that thinking. So those feelings are giving you feedback about the direction of how you're using this gift of creative thought. But then there's this other feeling, which is more aligned with what we've been talking about as the seventh sense, which is just this sense of yes, no, I want to, I don't want to. And we can navigate our lives by that felt sense. And it's so simple that it's doesn't, like, it can't be that simple, because what kind of an idiot must I be to have lived life the complicated way I did if it was that simple? And I'm not an idiot, so therefore it can't be that simple. I don't know how many logical fallacies were in that sentence, but I expect somebody could map it out and find 8 to 10. The no true Scotsman fallacy. I don't know. There's probably a bunch of, but actually, what if it is that? What if we are made so that our kind of emotions tell us about how we're using thought, and this deeper sense, this navigable sense, this common sense, lets us know what to do, what not to do, when to do it, and when not to do it.
Thank you, Michael. And I think that beautifully links back to the employee story at the beginning about that knowing on day one and just being able to listen to it. And I'm sure that you hear this a lot. And my assumption is, I don't know for certain, of how much you've impacted my life. And I know that you have impacted many other people's, because I've had conversations with them. I'm really grateful for the time that I've spent with you. You made me. You didn't. You made me write poetry. Poetry emerges from me at random times, which was something that was a catalyst from a course that I experienced with you. And I'm extremely grateful to you on many, many levels. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for being. And I look forward to catching up with you all again on another episode very soon.
Thank you for having me.